What an awesome creative energy this is here in Austin, Texas. Welcome everybody to a very special episode of the Signal Room podcast, live from South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, my home state. I'm joined by my usual crew, the great Waterfile strategic advisor in localization and founder of Lokverse, Jonas Rydberg, straight from Sweden, Senior Vice President, Multilingual AI at Scientific, and the Vincent Swan, Vice President of Innovation and Solutions at Scientific as well. Welcome to the show. And we usually kick off our podcast with a quick fire round, so we're going to go ahead and do that as well. The rules of the game are very simple. It's yes or no in agreement or disagreement. So feel free to chime in, guys. Here comes our quick fire round. The first one is AI will stop being a product category and become basic infrastructure. Agree or disagree?
Disagree.
Agree eventually.
Agree.
Ooh, we have disagreement right out of the gate already. We might have to pick that up in the episode a little bit later on. General purpose AI models will lose ground to smaller specialized systems. Vincent, I think I know your answer.
I don't think they'll lose ground, but I think the smaller specialized systems will reach much more importance.
All right, we're going to deepen that out in a second.
Right? That was a long yes or no.
Yeah, that was... Go ahead, Jonas.
No.
Disagree.
Okay, good. The real value in AI is no longer in the model, it's in the system around it. Wada?
Agree.
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 Nice. We found some agreement here. Prompting is already becoming obsolete as a core skill.
Disagree.
Yeah, disagree.
Disagree.
Agents will replace more workflows than most people are ready to admit.
Agree.
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 It took a little bit of thinking there, Jonas.
Boring when we're agreeing too much.
We're underestimating how fast AI capabilities are becoming commoditized.
Disagree.
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 All right, that was the first round of quick fire. We want to talk this afternoon a little bit about the background of AI, and one of the things we agreed upon before this episode is that we should talk to the audience here a little bit and highlight how generative AI actually has its roots in the localization industry, the translation industry that we are active in. And it did not just begin as a chatbot interface. It began with language, so to speak, and in the transformer architecture that now powers AI systems. Vince, can you give us a little bit more background about this and deepen that out for us?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. When I was doing my initial research around this, I kind of thought, oh, this is really started in the 90s or whatever. But actually the genesis of machine translation, as it's known in the localization industry, started just after the Second World War. The cryptographers who were code breakers during the Second World War realized that there was potential in the early computers that they used to generate, to translate languages. Ultimately, they worked on it for maybe 20 years, and somewhere around the late 60s, they kind of realized, well, it's not quite there yet, and the initiative failed. It's kind of remained in stasis until the early 90s, when computers had improved enough to be able to actually look at rule-based translation, which evolved. That was kind of the basis for quite a while, and then we got a statistical machine translation, which worked reasonably well, but kind of wasn't very sophisticated about grammar or the placement of sentences. So quite often the translations are a bit like Yoda from Star Trek, where you'd get stuff like postman the letter through the door he pushed. You know, the meaning was there, but not the sophistication. For a kid who grew up in the 70s, that was perfectly fine by me. And then around the early 90s, the neural machine translation came in, which was the beginning of the diffusers model and the sense of that. But it was really after, and also I think the important significance then was the language industry was quite used to what's now known as reinforcement learning, but at the time was post-editing of machine translation. The reason that it wasn't so impactful was there was no immediate feedback into the models. It was kind of, you would translate a lot of stuff, fix it up, and then you'd have to retrain the models a long time later. So it was quite slow progress. But after the All You Need Is Attention initiative, the paper around that, which has led to GPT and all of those models in 2017, that really became the encoder decoder model that became a generative AI now. And I think the language industry really took that on board around that between the 2017 and 2019. A lot of the instant reward models going back to the engines, and it essentially is what changed GPT-3 to the chat model it became today. And if you think back to that time, GPT-3, the original version of it, it hallucinated a lot. It showed a lot of potential, but there wasn't really the chat capabilities of it that the reinforcement learning model that was developed within the localization industry really helped it progress to the next phase. And that's what started the whole AI revolution, really, I think, from a language point of view. And that brings us up to within the last couple of years. I think there's some major changes even now, but up to the last couple of years, that's really been the foundation of where we are now and the basis of where we're going. So I could talk about this for ages, as you could probably hear, but that's, I think in a nutshell, that's where the progression was. And I think the interesting point is, while something has appeared to be really new from 2020 or whatever in what's now called the AI business, has been around for quite a while and has its roots and actually a lot of its roots and a lot of its techniques have been around in the localization for a lot longer than people would perceive.
If anybody was in doubt that we like to geek out, we've taken that right off the table right now. We know. Did you have anything to add to that, Jonas, to the history part?
I think it's interesting to look at the global communication industry at large, where localization is a part of it, translation is a part of it, and a clear signal, as we talk about signals in the signal room, is that we're finally at the point where the industry is accepting AI. If we look back to when, sort of to pick up where Vincent ended, when ChatGPT was launched with GPT 3.5, November of 2022, first couple of months, everyone was sort of excited to try and play with ChatGPT. But then after a while, everyone realized this actually can translate, so it can potentially replace us as an industry. And I went to an event in June of 2023, so about 6 months after, and it was clear there was a lot of anger and denial and paranoia. There were sentiments like the industry is dead, we'll all be out of jobs. And it's taken a long time, even since then, up until maybe 6 months ago or so, that people are actually starting to accept the fact that this is a change that is there. It will transform how we do work across global communication. And I think it's a little bit of a lost opportunity that it took that long to accept that change, because it will definitely happen.
We should have known, though. I can tell you, I started in localization in 1999, and within the first couple of months I started working in the translation industry, I was told that this was actually a dying industry, and now that there was going to be translation memory, we were on the way out, and I should pick a different profession. And here we are 26 years later or so, and we're still going strong. I think we've had bumps along the way, and we've seen machine translation and newer machine translation come on the scene, and we should have known by those experiences that usually when there's doomsday scenarios in the air, they don't really quite materialize. 2 years ago, the conversation around AI was very different, Jonas, like you just alluded already. How have buyer expectations around language and global communication or global reach shifted in these last 2 years?
I think we've moved from that resistance that definitely was the case for a number of years. And if we look at what we did at Scientific, I think we were almost too early in trying to use AI in a wider production type environment early on. And there was no willingness to change how they were handling global communication at the time. But over the last several months, that acceptance is there. And now we're seeing more maybe selective adoption, pilots, demos, and so on. But we also have production grade multilingual AI use cases for clients that are more forward-looking in adopting AI.
Yeah. What if AI allows companies to publish content globally at unprecedented speed, what happens to the human experience and the user experience on the receiving end?
Well, there's certainly excitement about AI accelerating net new content creation. But there's also an expectation that it's not just about time to market and speed to market. It's also about the feasibility to create new content and increase the volume. And that comes with a few signals or a few risks, if you will. If information intensifies, the cognitive overload will increase. And we're experiencing this, for example, during my time at Zendesk, when AI took the industry at scale. There was an expectation to increase the email sequence because now it's feasible. So instead of sending 3-4 emails, we can send multiple emails at the same time related to different products. And that actually impacted the nurture strategy. How many of us sign up to receiving text for emails and text from brands that we like only to cancel after a while because of the cognitive overload? I see a hand raised there. So again, we have to be mindful of the information overload if we decide to pursue the route of, okay, we're going to leverage AI for our content. And that leads to the second signal that we're also experiencing is that if a company decides to leverage AI to develop net new content across the globe, authenticity becomes at risk. Right? Because AI is going to help you generate content. It's going to land in a certain market, but it's not going to anchor. It's going to be emotionally flat. So, and this is where companies and brands that tend to differentiate themselves in terms of fine-tuning the last mile of this hyper-local content prior to launch and adding the necessary guardrails to elevate the content are going to have an edge because they're not going to solely rely on AI-generated output. And that leads to my third point or third signals. If we continue on this path, leveraging AI to generate net new content across global markets, the content curation is going to be as important as content creation. People are going to have to rely on copywriters, storytellers, brand enthusiasts, brand champions to fine-tune and solidify copy prior to launch. So again, I am not against generating or leveraging AI to generate net new content, but we have to be mindful of three signals. The cognitive overload, authenticity has to become front and center, and the content curation is going to be as important as content creation.
I want to ask the whole panel a follow-up question about that, because it seems to me that your second signal is so very important, and maybe one of the most important ones we can make in an era where we can hyper-personalize and administer content in a much more directed way. Isn't authenticity even more important now in this day and age, and getting the content right for certain personas than it was in the past, because people can detect fake even better now? Wouldn't you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I definitely would. I think that was something I would add to what I was saying, as hyper-personalization is going to increase. There's not going to be one single communication. I think that AI helps to be able to produce content that reflects hyper-personalization, but it does need governance. It's not going to be... I think that the challenge is the translation model is now a language understanding model. And I think the challenge is making sure that the sophistication of looking at different verticals, looking at different user groups, while it's possible to generate content for them, it has to be content that's relevant and touches them. And I think that it is a risk that just over creating without and under curating leaves a gap there, I think.
Yeah. Anything to add, Jonas?
I think the biggest challenge is in the models themselves in that. So if we start generating content for a global audience, we'll have to generate that content in the language of the market as well. If you look at pretty much every foundational model today, at least 50% of the training data that went into training that model was in English. Yeah. And it's probably up to 70% in some cases, so basically using all the data, all the content on the internet and whatever other data that these foundational model companies had access to. So it's 50% plus in English, and then you have Chinese around 10% of the training data, and then a whole bunch of 98 or so some languages. making up the remaining 40%, where some languages will have less than 1% of the training data in that specific language. So getting market appropriate content in all those languages is not possible yet based on the training data that was used to train those models.
I think when you consider that 40%, that probably one of the biggest sub-languages of that 40% is Python. So there's far more training data of Python in the foundation models than there are of most spoken languages. And when you kind of look at that, you start to understand where the gap is. There's in the longer tail languages and the satisfaction of AI, most of the people see the success in English and see the success in Chinese and kind of go, oh, that's spectacular. But actually the satisfaction and the use of the AI output as you go down the language chains, especially in smaller, lower tail languages, becomes much more challenging. And if you, for anyone who's involved in coding, you can recognize how much that's improved over the last 2 or 3 generations of models. You think there's still a long way to go for the translation or the language management within LLMs and within the foundation models still needing to progress. It's quite interesting when you look at the breakdown of the training data that's actually being used.
Yeah, my knowledge of Python is quite limited, so I think I'm going to be in trouble if that's the direction.
Your LLM will translate it for you, no problem.
So much in our industry for the past 30 years has been about transferring things from English into other languages. And I think in the future, we might even see scenarios now where there's no source language as such anymore, and we're going to be creating straight up content in different languages, in different creative scenarios. What does that mean for our industry and the way that we're going to be applying that workflow?
I'll give it a go if you want.
Yeah.
Well, I think traditionally in the industry, it was always a single source of truth, English to whatever the target language was. I think the AI industry in general, particularly around training, the way tasks or projects were assigned were based on a brief. They weren't necessarily based on reproducing the English version into another methodology. And I think that the requirements around language are going to be that instead of it being an English document or an English manual that's created and then translated, it'll happen much earlier in the process, particularly around software, actually. It'll happen much earlier in the process, and the requirement will be multilingual from the outset. I think generative AI is going to replace translation, but it'll increase global communication and the sophistication of global communication. I think the language industry is starting to learn the lessons from the AI industry and the growth of AI industry. And I think what's kind of interesting in AI developers over the years have been implementing language skills with the expectation that the quality is going to reach the point. It's going to get good enough at some point. So they're building with the absolute certainty that things are going to reach the level of quality that they want. I think the AI, the localization industry hasn't been as adventurous. It's looked at the quality benchmarks now and gone, oh, well, it's not really achieving what we want. So discounting its capabilities. Whereas if you actually look in the longer arc and look 2 or 3 years down the line, the assumption should be that we're going to get to the quality benchmarks that are necessary to keep progressing.
Jonas.
And I think that's an opportunity for the industry as such, right? So I don't think that AI will replace people, period. I think the models will get there eventually, but there's an opportunity for the industry to be that governance layer, to review that, have the human in the loop, the expert in the loop. There's also an opportunity in working with the model builders to actually train those engines to work better in other markets. There's a huge business already, a lot of companies that provide that type of service based on the experience that they have around global communication and working with language experts and so on as well.
Awesome. That's a perfect segue into our first real segment. We're going to be talking a little bit about the language gap in a borderless world and what that really means. What I have a first question for you. If digital is global by default, why is meaning still fragile? And the follow-up to that is, in a world of AI-generated content, how important is cultural context for meaning, maintaining trust with users in particular?
Well, I would say cultural context, but also relatability. These are the strongest signals for trust because, as I mentioned earlier, the AI will help you generate content. It will land in a certain market, but it will not anchor. It's going to be emotionally flat. And your customers are going to look at the content and say, is it relevant to me? Does it meet my expectations culturally? And so forth and so on. And if these questions are not answered, this is when trust starts eroding. There's real power in relatability. Relatability drives engagement. The data tells us that more than 50% of customers are willing to pay more for a product if this product is available in their own language, if it's relevant to their daily needs, to their lifestyle, to their culture. So what this tells us that it's not just about content being available, it's about relatability because it drives engagement. Engagement drives curiosity, and that curiosity will drive your customer to be completing this purchase or this cart transaction. So again, I go back to the cultural context, but most importantly, authenticity, relatability in order to sustain this AI-generated content.
Yeah. How do we govern relatability in a way that it doesn't become a liability? Can we engineer for that, Vincent?
Can we engineer for that? I think so. I heard an interesting presentation by the marketing manager for American Airlines actually while I've been here, and she was talking about how marketing in the past has all been about brand awareness, brand recognition. But once you reach a certain level of sophistication about your brand awareness, the next most important thing is to get closer to your customer. And I think getting close to your customer, now you're talking about the sophistication of cultural relevance. You're kind of looking much more at not just cultural reference by country, but also cultural reference by generation. So it's kind of a fragmented answer. There's no single answer to it. Can you engineer for it? Yes, but I kind of think we've talked a lot in the AI industry about human in the loop and where the human fits in the loop. I think it's slowly moving to a situation where it's going to be human above the loop. That actually you're not going to be that the human is not going to be so much of a participant in it as a moderator and a performing a governance to the overall output. That your messaging, instead of being one person making a decision and changing how the messaging is, it'll be a global decision looked at from a higher level. I think that the actions will be taken by different models or different agents as it moves through the process, but the quality at the end, and particularly for enterprise level communications, the quality at the end is what's going to be extremely significant.
I'd like to second Vince. Now, we tend to be focused on engineering in terms of software engineering, digital engineering of the experience, but we have to keep in mind that millions of products are around the world are in a brick and mortar environment. Yeah. And when AI or AI generated content is beating the product to the market, there's no time for due diligence. And we've had a similar issue during my time at Harley-Davidson Motor Company, where the content was generated before the bikes hit the market in India.
That's not a good thing.
Only to realize that, the bike was not engineered for the market, and the owner's manuals and the service manuals were not authored properly, because the bike in India, first of all, the campaign was irrelevant, the freedom of the open road. It's not relevant in India. Yeah. It's not even an option. The second thing, the bike, from a due diligence and a compliance perspective, needed to have a rack towards the end of the back wheel for the sari to be rolled around it from a safety perspective. So the content was there, it was available, but it was totally irrelevant. It created compliance issues. And these are the things that we need to be mindful for when we think of AI-generated content. It's not just about the digital experience. When an issue happens, you can fix overnight and you can adjust the code. When a product is shipped, that's it. And the engineering question should cover that aspect as well.
I like it so much. I think it's so hip that we can talk motorcycles and localization. That's a really great topic. We can talk about that any day if you ask me. Jonas, are companies still thinking English first and translate later, or seeing that there's a mindset change in the way companies are operating right now?
I think it's still English first for the most part, but there is a realization that AI can generate content in multiple languages, but we have to solve that problem that I mentioned previously, right? So we have to make sure that the models are ready for that. So that in itself is an opportunity for us as an industry to feed into that. We do see a signal that enterprises combine what used to be a separate department for the global communications, so translation, localization, and the prior step of content generation, combining that to find opportunities to optimize that process to be faster and finally be able to do simship in a true sense of the word.
Yeah. Vincent, many companies assume that if AI can translate, the language problem is more or less solved. And I hear signals from people on the business side that indicate that a lot of C-suite thinks that now there shouldn't be any budget anymore to translate because the problem indeed is solved. From a systems perspective, why is that assumption misleading, and how can we convince the C-suite that they're on the wrong track with this assumption?
So translation is not about words. The translation is solved, is about the words are solved, but the real challenge is communication, the message, and how the message is conveyed. I think, our history has shown that there's been various phases where machine translation has solved certain aspects of the translation challenge. The big challenge, I think, now is for LLMs to have a better language understanding, a better way of understanding the subtleties of each language. I've seen, gone back in my history, an awful lot of engineers who've made CMS, content management systems, believing they could make translation management systems because on the surface they look really, really similar. But the subtlety of what's going on underneath the hood really raises completely new challenges. And I think we're starting to see that the same in LLMs. I think that the ability to translate the words is there, but the ability to translate and understand the context is something that's only coming on board. We're in a very fluid situation now. We're in a hybrid situation. If you ask me in 2 years' time, I'd probably have a slightly different answer around this. I think the transition we're in now is a fascinating time because we're no longer. You can use a dictionary to translate words. It doesn't necessarily translate the meaning or the subtlety, or particularly in, say, more marketing type content. The what's suitable for the end user or the end target user really is different from country to country, and what works in one space really doesn't work in another. And I think there's so much focus around LLMs being successful in English that can often get lost. And I think that we're always seeing the bleeding edge of the really exciting new things, but effectively that's in English. There's a big gap that needs to be caught up with for us. And I think that the enterprise in general needs to become aware of that challenge to be able to fix that challenge. And I think that's maybe a gap in the understanding of C-suite at the moment, because if the C-suite is in English and they're seeing great gains, they're thinking those gains are available now, but really partially available, and they need more investment. So instead of cashing out based on the current level of success, there's a certain amount of savings can be had, but definitely it needs more investment in it to make those savings long-term efficient. And I think some people are going to get burnt before that becomes a philosophy that people start to realize. I think some people will get a shock to the system if they move too quickly. It's about safely moving rather than quickly moving, I think.
Yeah, for as long as I can remember in this industry, we've been trying to convince management of the importance of localization, and we've at times struggled conveying that importance because we were focused on linguistic outcomes or quality, for example, things that didn't really matter to people in the C-suite that much. Now we're at a technological point in time where we can potentially contribute a lot more to the outcomes of where businesses try to have impact. This is a question for the whole panel. Do you think that's the biggest opportunity for the localization industry to make a difference at this point?
I think maybe tying back to some of the points that Wada made on brand and the authenticity, but also the overall brand perception, I think there's a huge opportunity for the industry to up level and focus on the brand impact and how we influence the brand perception instead of just delivering multilingual content for a global audience. I think there's a blind spot in a lot of enterprises for how people get content today compared to how it was maybe 5 years ago. If I just look at myself, I would go to Google and I would search for the name of a company and then go to their website, or get a link and go to their website and read about that company, maybe go to Wikipedia and read a bit more. Today it's different, of course. You go to ChatGPT or Perplexity or Gemini and you get a curated summary of that brand or that industry. And enterprises need to provide the data that feeds those models or the content that the agents can find when they go look for that content. So leveling up as an industry to influence brand perception by providing help for what we call generative engine optimization instead of search engine optimization, I think is a big opportunity for the industry to change the brand of the industry as well.
Yeah, so much of the way we consume content has changed as well, hasn't it?
Yes, and I wanted to second Jonas's point here around how to communicate internally with stakeholders. Interestingly enough, I spent most of my time with my clients now coaching them on executive storytelling and how to pitch localization as a strategic lever, not just a transactional function. And I think the opportunity now for localization or translation professionals, or if we would like to call them global experience and global content professional, is to elevate the narrative and master the narrative of your stakeholders. If you're interacting with the CMO organization or your marketing stakeholders, you want to focus on leads, website traffic, and how translation work can accelerate this process. If you're working with your compliance stakeholders, and this is where the budget is, because for many companies, compliance is not an option, you can focus on governance and how to avoid fines because you are localizing and you're translating your content properly. So I think the opportunity for the localization team at this point is to master the narrative of the stakeholders and leverage the KPIs that are directly tied to their pain points.
Yeah. Jonas, you had something to add, Vince, go ahead.
Yeah, just following on from Jonas's point on the GEO, I think in the last 6 months there's been a real uptake in agentic use of LLMs, etc. And I think that it's coming fairly soon that people will have personalized agents that they train on their preferences. And at the point where people were prepared to put their credit card into their agent and let their agent do their shopping for them, that's going to be a real crunch point, because the enterprises who have the ability to speak to the agents are going to really make a difference and be the leaders in how that model of online shopping is going to change. If you're no longer doing a Google search and going through yourself through 5 or 6 or 7 options, and as Jonas was saying, go to Wikipedia and doing a research, if you're relying on an agent to make the recommendation to you or even act fully on your behalf as a proxy user on your behalf, the people who will be most successful are the people who are talking to the agents. And I think that is a major fundamental change that will come that probably isn't being recognized at the moment.
Awesome. So inadvertently, Jonas has already guided us into the second segment, so to speak. And the second topic of the podcast today is going to be about brand perception at scale. AI does not merely generate content. It reflects training data and it amplifies patterns. Vincent, if training data shapes output, should companies start thinking about their training data as part of their brand architecture?
Yeah, I think they already do. I think they think of their TMs as their basis of translation memories or their historical documentation as part of it. I think their tone, their style guides, all of the content that people currently manage will be the baseline for training. It's I think training material is a little bit of a misnomer, because I think there's less and less impetus to be training the models and more likelihood that the context that's put in at runtime is going to be more significant. So the historical data people have invested in for 20 years to keep that. I do think it's critical, but I also think it's evolving in the way it's going to be used. And I certainly think it's as precious now as it ever has been and will be going forward. I think it's mostly about how do we communicate the company culture? How do we build supporters rather than just customers these days? And I think there's a lot more movement in that direction. And I think that the historical corpus makes a difference around that.
Does that track with your experience at companies like Harley Davidson and Zendesk that
It
they
does.
think about? Yeah.
It does, certainly.
Okay. That was a short answer.
I think Vince summed it up in a very nice way.
Okay, good. Jonas, when enterprise leaders talk about scaling AI content globally, how often do they think about brand perception as a risk factor?
I think quality of the global communication is the number one priority still, and that is then reflected in the brand perception. I think AI offers opportunities to really increase velocity as well, so we can be much faster when we go global. But I do think that there is an opportunity for the industry to look at us as stewards of the brand perception instead of just providing global multilingual content. If I look at the industry as such, our industries, when I go to industry events, it feels like a pretty small knit industry, the same companies and people come, and I love that. It's great, but there is definitely an opportunity to look beyond what we've been doing for the past 10, 15, 20 years and evolve. It's been great here at South by Southwest as well to meet people in adjacent industries and see how they look at AI and some of the challenges that they've had. It's been very similar to our experience in the initial resistance, but then eventual acceptance of it.
Yeah, where are the biggest opportunities in your opinion?
I think it's speed. I think it's finally the ability to deliver global experiences more or less simultaneously across markets instead of having that English first mentality that we talked about before.
Yeah, same question as before. That tracks with you. Is it speed?
I think speed, but I mean, it's very easy to say speed. I think people must develop bias towards time. That period between thoughts and execution has to be shortened, especially in the localization field. And this is something I'm coaching most of the localization vendors or global content vendors around it, because usually it takes them time to unlock a feature. The 6 to 8 weeks or the 8 weeks to 12 weeks to build a connector and roll out a feature is no longer feasible. One of the reasons my team and I were successful at Zendesk is that we were faster than anyone else. By the time people put the meeting on the calendar, started brainstorming, came up with a few ideas for execution, my team and I has already made 5 different mistakes and found a better solution and better way to do it. So my recommendation or the opportunity or the signal for localization vendors and company is to have bias towards time, because this is an AI era, whether we like it or not, and we have to adapt to it.
Yeah, Vince, go ahead.
I think there's massive opportunities around multilingual or about multimedia stuff. I kind of think that the way people learn, the way people access information, even this, we do a podcast, which is essentially an audio format, but we do it with video nowadays. I think that the ability for companies to be able to look at multilingual video releases and multilingual video training, I think that's a big opportunity that perhaps is under-investigated at the moment. Traditionally, the localization industry has been about words. It's been about written text and image text. But I think as I look forward, I think video is going to become increasingly significant. And I think that that's an area that probably is underrepresented or is more challenging and has traditionally been taking a lot of time to be able to keep your video content up to speed and sim ship video content with your English content. I think that's changing now, and I think that that's an area that there's a lot of opportunities for growth in.
Good. Jonas, anything to add?
Good.
No, good. When companies scale AI-generated content globally, what signals tell you whether the experience will feel authentic or artificial? What are we specifically aiming for?
Well, a couple of signals. Again, is it grounded? Is it in human context?
Yeah.
Is it cultural specificity is there? Customers will have to look at the product and see if it's relevant for my lifestyle, because that's going to drive the purchasing decision. But the most important signal is coherence across various content touchpoints. And what I mean by that, if you look at the CMO organization, still the same organization, but you have engagement marketing, lifecycle marketing, digital marketing, and each group has their own authoring tools, and they author differently, even though they leverage the same brand guidelines. But when they go live, you notice that the long form content is not compatible or aligned with the social media feeds. The brand is not there. And to me, the minute I see that, you can literally smell it a mile away as a writer that, okay, this is AI generated content because there's no coherence across various platforms. So that's something definitely to watch for authenticity purposes.
Yeah. Do you have any examples of how much damage can be inflicted if there's a subtle cultural misalignment on brand?
Actually, I have a very good example, and it has to do with Harley Davidson. So Harley Davidson, as an iconic brand, as a motorcycle company, they rely heavily on their dealer network. And these dealers are not subsidiaries. They're agents of the organization. So they don't get much coaching on brand guidelines, but they're riders and they're motorcycle enthusiasts. So they tend to generate content as well in the name of Harley Davidson. But then you face brand erosion there because, okay, they're writing in a certain tone across different states in the US and overseas as well. And that impacts the brand guidelines. So the opportunity here actually is AI to act as a governance layer. This generated content can be available faster for dealers to leverage and maybe not to have to author on their own. So that's something definitely to watch for and consider. But there's another area too, and Vince and I were talking about this yesterday, that we look at AI governance and training agents and the AI orchestration as a role. But at some point, AI will be able to act as an orchestration agent, as a governance agent as well. So sometimes you're training AI to replace the next role that is not born yet.
Yeah, very well. We have arrived at the second quick fire round, so get ready. I'm going to be firing some statements to you that are recent signals in the AI world that I want your opinion on. Here comes the first one. Owning proprietary data will matter more than owning models.
Definitely.
True.
I agree.
All right, that's good. AI will fragment knowledge work more than it will eliminate it.
That's a kind of a maybe. It will take some qualifications. I'd say yes, but how about that?
It will transform it.
No comment.
That's fair.
That's the safe one. The other two are in trouble after the episode, so that's it. That's well played. Human oversight will become symbolic in many AI-driven workflows.
Agree.
Agree.
No, it's symbolic now, critical, I think. Symbolic is too weak a word.
I knew at some point you were going to swim upstream, Vincent. I'm not surprised. Embedding AI into existing tools will beat building standalone AI products.
100%.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yes, agree.
All right. The biggest risk isn't bad AI, it's over-trusting good-looking outputs.
Hallucination. Agree.
Agree.
Kind of disagree. Bad AI is the problem in the first place. I disagree.
We just have to make better AI is your point, I guess. In 2 years, today's AI experts will look like early adopters, not specialists.
True.
Yeah, I agree.
Agree.
And companies focusing on workflows will win over those focusing on models.
True.
Agree.
I agree.
Here comes the last one. We're closer to autonomous systems than most organizations are prepared for.
Agree.
Disagree.
Agree, but it's not immediate.
And it depends on the industry.
I like it when you break the rules and we get a little bit more.
That's like the real
serious. It's good. All right, we have arrived on the third and final segment of the podcast. We're going to be speaking about service layers to infrastructure. What does it actually mean when language stops being a service and becomes infrastructure? That's a question to the whole panel. Anybody want to take that one?
Depends on what industries you're talking about, etc. I think in the software industry, for example, the localization process or the translation process generally happened at the end of the life cycle. You build a successful application or a successful model in English, and then you look to make it globally ready. I think moving the localization piece of it to be intrinsic as part of the product rather than a separate process at the end effectively is going to improve the product, A, from its functionality, but B, in terms of cost, because finding a bug in Japanese after the fact, is a lot of regression needs to happen back down the chain to fix it. Whereas if it's intrinsic as part of the overall development chain, it ultimately means that by the time you reach a release candidate, you have a much more secure and a much more viable application for a global submission. I think a lot of my career I spent a lot of time dealing with software bugs because it didn't handle language direction correctly, or it didn't understand that German words could be twice as long as English words, for example. And once you realize that, it has to go back to the drawing board. They need the developers or the architects needed to re-examine their approach. And I think those mistakes are all going to be caught much earlier in the chain now, because we'll be able to model stuff in multiple languages at prototype stage, for example.
Anybody want to add something?
I think if AI is to be an infrastructure layer, mindsets will need to change. I think people are still afraid of that change, and people are too concerned about sunk cost in existing systems. And those existing systems will need to change to enable that infrastructure layer to be a reality. So I think that's the key. Mindsets need to change.
What?
Well, to Vince's point, it all boils down to the type of industry you're in. Is it a digital environment? Is it a brick and mortar environment? But it also boils down to the guardrails. What is your plan B if something goes terribly wrong at the infrastructure level? If companies are going to rely solely on AI, and we've seen it happen now with major software organizations that I don't want to name, they made very bold decisions related to AI, replacing humans and also replacing various tools around the organization, only to realize a couple of months later that this wasn't the smartest assessment. The other thing that we're experiencing and we're seeing on the buyer side of the industry of global content, companies feel that they can build the infrastructure and eliminate vendors, because they can have one employee or one headcount manage the tool for them, only to realize that this headcount does not speak 50, 60 languages and that the workload is not sustainable. So they resort back to their agencies and they're back to the drawing board. If you look at if you put this in numbers on your balance sheet, it's quite the loss. So again, I think there's excitement around the infrastructure related to AI, and as it should, but we have to be risk averse and have a fallback plan just in case something goes terribly wrong at the infrastructure level.
Yeah, talking about infrastructure, Jonas, how early in the process should companies consider global communication nowadays? We've talked about this a couple of times recently, so I know your answer, but go ahead, the audience doesn't.
So definitely much earlier than they do today.
Yeah.
So we talked to a lot of AI native companies that might have done their Series A or their Series B, and they are maybe starting to look outside their home markets, but they haven't considered how they communicate with those other markets. So actually starting to plan for that before you need it is the key. And we've seen that at organizations like OpenAI and Anthropic and Perplexity, that they kind of slipped up first. So we had OpenAI publishing content in 3 languages in the same piece of content mixed up, which obviously is not a good user experience. But since then, they've gone and hired a team to manage that. So they've hired people that will manage that global content, global communication to fix that very problem. To what I was point about compliance and the cost of it, the cost of running a team like that is much smaller than the cost of having a major legal issue because your global communication was insufficient.
Yeah, that's a signal that was received with lots of applause in our industry, and I think with a little bit of relief too, that it became clear that even OpenAI or Anthropic needs a localization manager in order to provide the governance to be able to lead that in the right way. Vincent, are we moving toward a world where multilingual capability is simply expected inside every AI system?
Yes. I think the capability needs to be there. Whether it needs to be fully intrinsic in the model or whether it needs to be of a certain quality in the model and then context allows it to bring out the sophistication of it is still kind of open. I think there's opportunities around that. But my sense of it is, yes, it needs to be multilingual if it's going to work on a global level.
Yeah. What new competencies will companies need if global experience becomes a structural capability?
Well, we spoke a little bit around governance and orchestration. And we're seeing this in new org charts related to AI, the AI governance manager, the AI orchestration manager. But again, Vince and I were talking about this yesterday. And at some point, you can train an agent and AI becomes your orchestration and governance agent. The other competency that I found very interesting is the AI predictability manager, revenue predictability manager, because now there's so much excitement about generating content and net new content in real time. So we moved from soon enough to real time, but how efficient is this content? What is the KPI that demonstrates that this AI generating content is leading to conversions and leads and purchases being made by customers? And the AI predictability manager's role is to basically come up with KPIs and metrics to prove that this specific tool that we're leveraging is actually efficient. And I want to go back to what Vince said earlier around, or your question to him. Platforms with multilingual embedded features. This is already available. And it started probably, 5-6 years ago with major CMSs, LMSs. They can unlock a translation feature for you. So you can generate your draft content in various languages. Is it correct enough? Is it culturally sensitive? Is it geosensitive enough? No, it isn't, but it's already there. And now I think we're at a point of perfection. How can we perfect this feature in the CMS or LMS or various software to provide this local language support?
I think that ties in as well to your point earlier about relevance and how do we manage that. And I think, it's going to come from human feedback. Ultimately, it's going to be another reinforcement learning from human feedback. And it will come in one of two ways. If it's performed before release by governance, you're going to get early feedback. If not, it's going to come from feedback where people just don't buy the product. And it takes a longer chain to get to that point. But the feedback will effectively be, well, it failed because sales dropped or people just didn't, the product just wasn't a success. So I think that, again, that governance to make sure that stuff is relevant is going to become a much more important role, possibly than even the translation piece of it. I think that the messaging and the suitability of the messaging and the skill that it takes from a language expert to be able to evaluate that and improve that earlier in the process is going to lead to more success in the products after launch. Otherwise, the failures are clear. The product will fail or the solution won't work.
Okay, we're slowly coming towards the end of this session, but before I let the audience give us a couple of Q&As, I don't want to let you quite off the hook yet. We're going to put your feet to the fire when it comes to signals from the future and show your visionary qualities a little bit to our audience here. So let's talk about some of these signals. What particular signals are you watching that others are ignoring in global communication? What?
How the new generation and the next generation make their buying decisions and their purchasing decisions.
I think how organizations are changing, the fact that we see the convergence of content creation and language translation is one. The acceptance of AI is another signal that is getting clearer and clearer and stronger. And that's just going to keep growing.
The way people consume information. I think previously information consumption was done by push methodologies. it was pushed to you. I think increasingly younger generations use a pull technology. They decide how they want content presented to them. They decide how they want to experience sport or, their entertainment. You see a lot of advertising now has gone to second screen. So you'd be watching something on TV, but you'd be chatting with your mates on the phone about the solution around it, or looking for associated information on live events, for example. So I think that choice will become more important, and I think pull, the likelihood that people will pull information rather than respond to push information is going to be a significant signal going forward.
Very well. You guys are on your toes. I'm going to kick it up a little bit more in complexity. What's the biggest misconception about AI and global communication today? Who wants to go first?
It's magic. That's the biggest misconception. It doesn't do it. It's not as good as they say, but it's going to get there.
That AI is knocking down barriers. It isn't actually. It's hiding them better.
Ooh, good one.
Interesting.
That it's enough to go to ChatGPT and your multilingual communication is sorted.
What's going to feel obvious in 3 years that feels controversial right now, guys?
Agents policing agents. I think that humans won't be able to police agents. I think there'll be an agent police force to deal with how do we monitor what's going on with agents.
And I would second Vince by saying that it's not just agent at the professional level, but in your daily life at the personal level too.
That we lost a lot of time between 2022 and 2026 debating AI instead of actually implementing it for the benefits that it does have.
I like that very much. We're going to end the episode on a one-sentence advice that I want you to complete, and then I'm going to hand it over to the audience and field a couple of questions if there are any. If you're building globally with AI in 2026, what should you not ignore? Don't ignore
Authenticity, human experience.
Language.
I don't have one word. I would kind of go embrace the inevitable.
You're always breaking the rules.
I know, but like rules are to be broken. Embrace the inevitable. What you think is going to happen is going to happen. It's just not here yet. So plan for the future. Planning. Maybe like we could say one word: planning.
Very good. You came around. I like it. We have a couple of minutes left for questions. Is there anybody who has a question in the audience?
Yes. Thank you so much for coming today and speaking. You mentioned agents a lot in the panel discussion, and I'm just wondering, I've heard stories of people using agents to negotiate better car prices. They've told their agents, call as many car dealerships as you can, negotiate the best price for this car for me. And they've actually done that. They've found car prices at a very cheap rate. And as humans use agents to do tasks for them, what does that mean for agents to interact with websites or brands that are in other languages? And does that open up the field a bit more for consumers like myself?
I've been interested in one on that. I've spent a lot of time recently looking at OpenClaw and the capabilities of agents around that. And as part of that initiative, there was this multiple website set up, which is kind of like Reddit for agents to talk to each other. It was kind of set up as an experimental thing, kind of a good gimmick. It's recently been bought by Meta. But what I found interesting when I was looking at it was language wasn't a barrier there. The agents understood all languages. So you would have an agent would post a comment in English, another agent would respond to it in Chinese, another agent would respond to that Chinese comment in English or in Spanish. And actually the communication layer, there was no language barrier in it. So I think when you start looking at it across languages, there's going to be an agent speak. It's not really going to be about the spoken language. Most of the reason that we use common languages with agents at the moment is so we can monitor what they're doing. But actually, when it gets to the point where your agent is talking to my agent for something for us to organize, they don't necessarily need to speak in the same language we do or either of us. So I think there will be a point where the language barrier will break down.
The language industry, I think, actually has an opportunity here that goes beyond just agent use. And I know for a fact that there's a lot of gaming companies that are working on omnidirectionality in localization. What that really means is that maybe I'll be playing a game online in French and I'll be communicating with somebody in China. They'll be communicating with me in Chinese and listening to me what I'm saying will be communicated back to them in Chinese as if it's native. And so the omnidirectionality will create a world in which I can communicate globally with people in any language I want, and there'll be multiple flows back and forth in the same language that I'm speaking. So there's an opportunity to exploit that kind of thing as well.
I just think to build on Vincent's answer, the most fascinating thing with Maltbook to me was, and we talked about that, is that the agents spoke amongst themselves in a non-human language, right? They were talking to each other and we couldn't understand what they were talking about. I don't know if they were plotting our downfall, but there were like articles about that. So I think that's, again, maybe an opportunity for us. We do need humans in the loop to monitor that, to see what's actually going on there on that.
Yeah. Or study up on our machine language skills, or Python, like Vince.
Or maybe we go back to cryptography again at the beginning of machine translation.
I think there are pros and cons to that. So the idea or the availability of agents to negotiate on our part is great, but also we shouldn't dismiss the cognitive decline that is happening for the next generation. They're going to rely heavily on agents for everyday life, and they're not going to be challenged enough. They're not going to develop interpersonal skills and communication skills because of the heavy reliance on agents. So I think the excitement is legitimate, but we should not ignore the cognitive decline that comes with it and find ways to balance these things, especially if you have children. I mean, you can relate to what I'm saying now. And it's, to me, as a mother of two, it's quite the concern.
Buy your kids books is maybe the lesson. Guys, we've officially run out of time, unfortunately. Stay tuned for the next episode of The Signal Room. You can find us on all the regular podcasting channels from YouTube to Spotify. And we look forward to speaking to you again soon from The Signal Room. Thank you for joining in.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.